So my name is Daniel Chait. I'm the co-founder and CEO at a company called Greenhouse. We make hiring software. When we started the company about 6 years ago, we had some incredibly ambitious goals. We really felt that there was a huge opportunity for us to change and improve how almost every company hires. And I'm very proud that over the past 6 years, we've accomplished a tremendous amount. Just to put a little bit of color on that, in the past year alone, we helped nearly 2,500 organizations to make over 250,000 new hires. And these are in every sector and all throughout the world. So we've accomplished certainly a lot. But there's still so much more to do. I feel every day like I'm very much at the beginning of the journey. And so as I think about what else that there is for us to accomplish and where we want to go next, what more exciting opportunity is there than to help companies tackle the problem of building more diverse companies and making their hiring process more inclusive. And so I was very excited to enter onto this journey, and I'm here today to share with some of you some of the things that I've learned and some of the lessons that I was able to take by working with experts, by working with our customers as we launched a product in this industry. And so just a couple weeks ago, we held a conference in New York City, and we announced the launch of our newest product, Greenhouse Inclusion, which is aimed at helping customers of all sizes build more inclusive hiring practices and scaling their inclusive behaviors across their organization. This is something that we felt at the time was really right for, that our customers were asking for, and was a unique opportunity for us to contribute to our industry. And along the way, I was very fortunate that we were exposed to experts in academia, to great practitioners at our customers, and to partner with outside advisors. I'd love to share a little bit of that with you, and then tell you some of the stories from the science and then some of the practice of how you can scale inclusion in your own organization. So in order to bring the most diverse and well-informed team to bear on this problem, we partnered with experts such as Shelley Carell from Stanford, Mary Murphy from Indiana University, Candice Morgan, who's a customer of ours and the head of D&I at Pinterest. We also partnered with Joel Emerson and Paradigm as a launch partner to build Greenhouse Inclusion in partnership with Paradigm. And so all of these experts brought both field expertise as well as laboratory expertise to the table. I feel very fortunate that we were able to bring such a well-rounded and diverse group of people to bear on this. The stories are also super interesting. When you get into the science of how this stuff works, where bias comes from, and how you can overcome it, is a really fascinating one. Now, the first thing I learned is that becoming more diverse and scaling your inclusion is not really about kind of avoiding getting sued or avoiding the next PR disaster. And it's not really even just about feeling good about ourselves or kind of doing the right thing, although I feel that's important and many leaders today do. But diversity has been shown through lots of research to be a catalyst for tons of important business benefits. Diverse teams are more collaborative, they're more creative, they're better at solving hard problems. So being more diverse, bringing together more diverse teams is something that's becoming really important for the bottom line at every business today. And that was one of the first insights that I saw as I got into this field. Now, of course, this is all over the news, right? Everybody's hearing about the Me Too movement. We've seen even this week issues happening at Starbucks. We're all feeling the stress of what's going on in society and what's going on inside of our own organizations and the challenges of that diversity poses there. And yet, the world is very short on solutions. And so we all struggle to come to grips with that as we see that, hey, this stuff is important to us, but the solutions just aren't landing. One interesting stat to just really hit home how far we are from having solved this problem yet. Sheryl Sandberg's nonprofit foundation, leanin.org, did a study. And in that study, 90% of leaders that were interviewed said that they were prioritizing gender diversity in their organizations. But that same study, the employees of those organizations, only 50% of them agreed that their companies were in fact prioritizing it. So the desire is certainly there, or starting to be there at the leadership level, but I think there's a long way to go to solving the problem, and I think that's where we saw the opportunity to move from kind of awareness and recognition of the issue to really solving and tackling the challenge. And this is the audience participation part. I've got two, and here's the first one. When you look at this diagram, what do you see? Well, most people, when they look at this optical illusion, it's a very famous optical illusion, they look like those blue bands that are going across the page are diagonal. What blows your mind is that they're completely straight. And the thing about this optical illusion that's really interesting as you get into this field is that the mistake doesn't happen in your eyes. Your eyes are working perfectly fine. The mistake happens in your brain, right? And to me, that's really interesting because we think of our brains as these like powerful tools. We live in our brains and in our minds. And yet with this very simple drawing, I was able to show you that your brain can fail you in very predictable ways and lead you to exactly the wrong answer. And so why is that? Well, in many ways, your brain is built to take shortcuts. And these kind of mental shortcuts, they're necessary to get through the day. You have a lot of decisions to make every day, a lot of things to do. And so getting past, the world and getting to answers requires that you take mental shortcuts. So taking mental shortcuts itself isn't bad. The issue is that the mental shortcuts that we take, they're not random. They happen predictably in certain ways that create the same bad answers over and over again. And that predictability and the errors that we make, that's an example of a kind of bias. And so the mental shortcuts that we make, they're subject to lots of different influences from around us. I'll illustrate that in a minute. But that all creates an atmosphere where bias is inevitable. Okay, second, audience participation. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for a minute and just picture a genius, if you will. All right, you can open your eyes up now. So I'm betting a lot of you pictured someone like this, right? Albert Einstein. Why is that? Well, remember I said that the shortcuts that you take are influenced by the things around us. It turns out a study was done, and 90% of people believe that a genius is more likely to be a man than a woman. And so when I ask you to picture a genius, you're likely to picture someone like this. That's an example of how those mental shortcuts that you take can be influencing your decisions in predictable ways and unfairly to certain groups of people, right? And it also shows us that the mental shortcuts that we take, it's not just about optical illusions and kind of brain teasers, but it's also in how we assess people. And where else do we assess people more and with more consequence than in hiring, right? So these things have terrible consequence. Now, when you think about an organization and how do you overcome all this, what we've identified is that there's 3 key challenges to overcome when you want to become more inclusive as an organization. I'm going to walk you through those and then we'll talk about some solutions because so far it's pretty depressing. And so the first challenge is that it's a struggle to change behavior. As we saw, our minds are hardwired in certain ways and we make predictable errors as a result of them. Overcoming those challenges is just very difficult. Secondly is that hiring is a complex chain of events that starts from the very moment you meet someone and goes through a whole series of things that may happen through your hiring funnel onto when someone joins the organization. And every step of the way, there can be issues. And most solutions have typically focused on kind of either one-time trainings or very top of the funnel. We need to reach out to more people of X or Y category. And then lastly is these are notoriously difficult problems to track and measure. People don't often have good data about what's happening in their hiring funnels. They don't know the results of any given effort that they take. And of course, what gets measured gets improved. When you can't measure something, progress is impossible. So how do you design solutions then to scale inclusion at your organization? I'll talk about 3 different ways that line up to those challenges, and then we can dig into some science behind each. So the first is that you need to operationalize behavior change. This is not a one and done type of thing where you close up all your Starbucks, you give everyone 3 hours of diversity lessons, and you get back to slinging coffee. It's not going to solve it. You need to figure out how do we actually operationalize this on an ongoing basis to create lasting change. Secondly is, of course, you need to focus on the entire funnel. You need to recognize that it's not just about who's applying to your jobs and making sure that's a balanced flow, although that's important, but you need to recognize all the things that happen up and down that funnel that can have real impact. And then, of course, lastly is you need to be able to measure the impact of not only what's going on at a given time, but when you make change to see what's happening there. Okay. So let's have a look into each one of these. First, operationalizing behavior change is very hard for 2 really main reasons. Number 1 is kind of knowing what people should do differently is really hard. And number 2 is getting everyone to keep doing that stuff over and over again throughout your entire organization is equally or more hard. And so there's lots of research that we can draw on to help us answer the first question, which is how do we help overcome bias? And also there's lots of things that we can do on a practical level to put tools and process in place to scale those learnings out. And I'll share one study with you that I think illustrates both those points quite nicely. There was a study done at Yale University where they were attempting to understand some things about gender bias. And in the study, they basically took people into the experiment and they asked them to evaluate candidates for a police chief. And a police chief job is something that stereotypically people would view as a more male job, a male-dominated job category. And so what they found in this study was that the people in the experiment would categorically change their criteria after the fact to give preferential treatment to the male candidates over the female candidates. It worked like this. They would show the people in the experiment two resumes. And one resume would have more kind of experience and street smarts, and the other resume would have kind of more education and administrative experience. And some of the resumes would have, of course, male names and female names at the top. And invariably, the people would choose more of the male candidates as their choice. And when they asked them why, they would name whatever criteria were represented by that resume afterwards. So if they saw a male with more education, they would choose that person. And when you ask why, they would say, well, I feel education is more appropriate for a criteria to choose a police chief or street smarts. So that's depressing. But critically, what they also found was if they asked the people ahead of time to choose their criteria, then they showed them the resumes, the bias went away, right? And so the usable fact here is if you tell people ahead of time, before you start looking at candidates and interviewing, we're going to get together as a team, we're going to outline a key scorecard of the things we need to look for in our candidates and how we're going to assess them, that agreement can then go a long way towards combating bias because everyone's agreed up front on how you're going to assess people and you can compare apples to apples. Focusing on the entire funnel. This could be a whole day or a whole week, right? There's tons of stuff that happens when you think about the top of your funnel, the mid of your hiring funnel, and all the way at the end. I'll highlight just a couple. At the very top of the funnel, let's think about our job postings. We've all seen, job postings where, the language is very extreme because you want to stand out and you want to cut through the noise. But a lot of that language in those job postings can turn off the very candidates that you're trying to appeal to when you're trying to build more inclusive practices. So there's tons of resources. Actually, on our website, we've got plenty of articles that you can go read about on Greenhouse website about how to remove bias from your job postings. There's a partner that we work with called Textio, who's famously produced machine learning for this, where in real time, as you write copy, they'll highlight the things that are maybe biased. But you can imagine if you say we're looking for ninjas and rock stars and it's going to be kick-ass and the environment's amazing, that can have a negative impact. And replacing that with more balanced language can help people who maybe self-select out to instead decide to apply for your role. Employee referral programs is another really interesting example of this. So employee referrals, anybody in the hiring world knows, are great. They're less expensive to make, they stay longer, they perform better, they reinforce all kinds of good stuff. But when you're trying to build more diversity, referral programs can also create problems for you. Why? Well, people are more likely to refer others who are like themselves. In a recent study, 65% of the people in the study referred people more often of their own gender and 70% of their own racial or ethnic background. So obviously, if you just go out to your employees and you say, we need more referrals, that's going to tend to reinforce the imbalances you have rather than combat them. But there's a solution. So our customer, Pinterest, decided that they wanted to tackle this problem. And they found a really simple solution that was free and created better results in every way. And all they did was, when they were asking their employees to submit referrals, they prompted them and said, hey, remember, diversity is important for us to building a stronger company. Please consider submitting a diverse slate of candidates that you may refer to the organization. And just by that simple prompt, they saw amazing results. In their engineering team alone, in a very short amount of time, they were able to increase diversity by 24%. Let's move to the middle of the funnel. One thing that may not be obvious is this idea about leveling the playing field. But we all come to interviews with different backgrounds and different expectations. If you're not used to being part of this organization, if you don't have friends who have worked there, if you're coming from a different or disadvantaged background, you may come to the interview just not as a very prepared interviewer. And yet, you may be equally or better prepared for the job. And so you need to be really careful that your interviews aren't choosing people who are just better at interviewing, rather they're choosing people who are better at the job. And so our customer, Stripe, does a great job at this. They prepare a candidate packet that all the candidates get before they come to interviews. And in that packet, it tells people, here's where you're going to go, here's what the interview is going to be like, here's the kinds of interview experiences you're going to go through. And so they feel like they're well prepared and they can prepare ahead of time so that everybody comes on a level playing field and you can do a more objective job of choosing people. And then lastly, at the offer stage, there's a lot of talk about this in the press as well, you may have heard, but people tended historically to give offers by looking at your salary history and then starting to think about, well, what would I offer you that would be a little bit more than what you're making now and try to get you to work here. And of course, historically, there's a big imbalance in salary, so that perpetuates the imbalance. Well, that's now illegal in a growing number of states, which is a good thing. But it's still in a state where it's legal. It's still a wise practice that, rather than making salary offers based on people's past history, to construct salary bands that represent what you think is a fair compensation for a given role and make offers that way. That way you're not perpetuating that type of inequality. So there's a ton more of science behind here and tons of more techniques that you can use to line up onto your hiring funnel. but in the interest of time, I'll move on to measurement. And really the key here is you have to start tracking demographic data. Most companies don't do this, and as a result, they have no insight into like where are people getting dropping out into our funnel, what does our candidate flow actually look like, and so they lack the ability to set any goals or target changes appropriately into where they are, and then they never know if anything they did worked. And that lack of insight in data really hampers your ability to make any progress. So I'll show you a quick screenshot here. This is from Greenhouse Inclusion, where we actually show you a breakdown of your hiring pipeline by demographics, so you can choose any demographic dimensions that you want. And this really lets you pinpoint the areas in your funnel where problems may be occurring so you can target the appropriate strategies. Okay? So anyway, just to wrap this all up, clearly I don't have a silver bullet. This is a long discussion, and we're just getting started. But I think the world is ready to stop worrying about, is diversity the right thing, and do we even care about this? We're at the point where everybody's interested in solving this problem. It's now time to look at the science and research and some of the early progress that's been made at leading companies to solve the problem once and for all. Thanks a lot.